spoken with you about the importance of self-awareness. But when we get stuck into too much thinking about ourselves, it sometimes can stand in the way of our ability to think and understand others. Empathy is exactly that. It's that ability to put ourselves in another person's shoes. Empathy is the counterforce, if you want, of self-awareness. It is the yin-yang. One makes you able to think about yourself, the other makes you able to enter the reality of the other. All relationships are this dance between self and other or others. How much I need to know me, how much I need to know you. So here's a situation that I have often heard, that people would describe somebody and they say that person is always in a bad mood, or that person is always stressed, or that person is always critical or picky. And it's easy to respond from a place of criticism, judgment, frustration, annoyance, like, who likes this? And then every once in a while, you'll find in the group somebody who says their mother is sick. They have to go to take care of somebody every morning before they come to work. They just lost someone. Some circumstance that says this person isn't just a nasty person who's always critical or always in a bad mood. It doesn't make you like it more, but it changes your entire rapport to the person. This person often says no first. And now if you go back to what I taught to you in the first lesson about autonomy and interdependence, often you will find that people who had to be real risk assessment people, not risk takers, but risk managers, because everything relied on them, because the margin of error was narrow, because the circumstances in their growing up was often very dire. They will say no unless there is certainty. I react a certain way to somebody who says no all the time, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't have a better understanding as to how did they get to that? And that back and forth between self-awareness and understanding of the other, between what's happening in the here and now and what is the history that underlies our coping or our styles in this moment, that is the layering of relationships that is happening all at the same time. Now that we're seeing how empathy is essential in our understanding of others, let's dive into some more specific examples of how this plays out. In relationships, you have one constant factor, and that's you. And then you have others. And one of the very interesting things that we do in relationships is we look at sameness or difference. Who resembles me, who is different from me. And one of the interesting mishaps that often occur in relationships is that we can assume similarity when in fact there is difference. Or in reverse, that we can assume that we are quite different when in fact we are much more similar. And that is one of the riches of relationships, is that you can't always know for fact in advance. And so in this instance, I wanted to play you a clip from my podcast, How Is Work, of a manager and her direct report who are experiencing the combustion of assuming similarity and familiarity in a situation where it is not lending itself to a good outcome. And the new manager comes in and she looks for shortcuts, which we all do. And she looks for one of the shortcuts, which is, you and I am a Latinx woman, you are a Black American woman, and we are both women of color, and probably that may bring us closer sooner and faster. So the session is called Couples Therapy with My Boss. And the reason this is only going to be audio is, one, to protect the identity of the people that are in the session, and two, because I believe that when you listen carefully to others, you see yourself. So let's listen.
Well, in general, like, folks of color are quickly bonded, was just my experience. I think part of me expected the same thing. So one, I didn't feel that necessarily on our staff in general. And I do think that there was like a little assumptions I made, of course, of how like we could connect more quickly. So that's where I took a few steps back of like, okay, those are not assumptions that I can just make.
Like
and
what?
I think that we were just going to be able, there were going to be certain understandings or connections or comfort level or rapport or whatever that is that I might not have otherwise with someone else that wasn't a person of color right off the bat.
But I had, first of all, never been managed by a person of color. My managers from previous jobs were all white men or white women, and I didn't know how to accept just a relationship based on our race when we weren't of the same identities, especially from someone who is like in power in regards to my position.
The idea that I wanted to know you quicker, but not because I didn't want to know you, but because I was trying to bring us together into this endeavor that we have to do, which is work together. That, I think, is a very important thing to understand. All of us generalize. All of us make assumptions. All of us try to know faster who the other people are. And sometimes we make mistakes. I think what's very important here is to not launch into a criticism. What did she do wrong? Because there is nobody who did anything wrong here. This happens to us all the time. We enter in situations and we need to gather information very quickly. We look for ways to connect with each other. So once you understand that, and once the younger woman understood that about her manager, it became less of, who do you think you are and why do you think you can know me so quickly? It became more, I understand where you were coming from. And it invited more compassion, more understanding in their dialogue. So what was very beautiful in the session was that the manager, she didn't take it so personally. You see, she tried, she assumed familiarity. And when her colleague told her, no, that's not the case, don't do that to me, she didn't just get all hurt and offended and she didn't withdraw. She actually reversed course. And that was a real sign of relational flexibility. She just understood that doesn't work with her. It worked with others, by the way. And she didn't problematize the person who said that's not what suits me. She just said, I need a different tack with you. And she tried something else. That is a very, very good reaction, because the tendency would be, I meant well and it didn't work, and therefore now I'm mad at you or upset with you that you made me fail, so to speak. Rather than, I learned something about you. This is not the way to go about this in my experience with you. And I thought that was an excellent sign of her as a manager, to know that you manage people differently and that you don't have a one-size-fits-all. That probably should be the subtitle of any course on relationships. One size never fits all. In every relationship, we try to balance our awareness of ourselves and our awareness of the other. And what's so interesting is that one of the things that many of us will notice when we are in relationships is that we tend to give to the other what we would want the other to give to us. But it isn't necessarily what the other one needs. If I am a person who, when I am upset, I like to be comforted, I like to be held, I like someone to put their arm around me, I may then want to do that to you when you are upset. But you may be the person who, when you are upset, you need to be left alone. You don't want to be touched. You don't want any overstimulation. You just want to be able to regroup on your own and to regulate yourself. This is a classic example. It's meant really beautifully positively. I want to give to you that which I think is important, and I have learned it to be important because it's what I want. But the beauty in a relationship is that I actually learn to get to know you, and that I end up giving to you that which it is that you need, rather than what it is that I would want and need from you. You find out what is best for someone else in a number of ways. You observe them. You observe them in other situations than just with you, or in situations with you. Watch them. Pay attention. Ask questions. Ask them. In a situation like this, when you're frustrated, do you want me to leave you to figure it out by yourself, or do you prefer that somebody comes and takes it out of your hands and does it for you? Which is me, by the way. I have this dynamic with my husband. He sees me struggling, and I want to say, don't you see I'm struggling? Help me. Whatever it is, trying to open a jar, it doesn't matter. But he says, if you need my help, you would ask me. That's a classic. So you ask questions. And most importantly, if you've done it twice, 3, 4, 5 times the wrong way, as in you've done what suits you, but it doesn't suit them, change. Rather than do it one more time, hoping that this time it will work. You've been told already, no, that is not the right way. So you know better, so do it. In relationships, language shapes the experience. What you tell shapes how you experience it, how you feel it, how you believe it. And we have a number of common distortions. Cognitive distortions is really what they are called, that we bring to our relationships. One classic one is the fundamental attribution error, by which we tend to see ourselves as complex and the other person as more simple. Our behavior we see as contextual and circumstantial, and the behavior of the other person we see as a sign that is characterological. For example, I may be in a bad mood today, and I would explain to you that I am in a bad mood because there was a lot of traffic and I got really stressed and I came late, and hence my bad mood. But when I look at the other person, I don't necessarily give them that same benefit of the doubt at that moment. And I look at them and I say, no, they're in a bad mood because they had a tough time being here and so forth. I say they're in a bad mood because they're a cantankerous person. I make it characterological about them, and I make it as if it's a trait of the person, whereas I make mine as a trait of the circumstances. Watch this and ask yourself, has it happened to you that you describe your story circumstantially and you describe other people's actions and motives as being part of what you consider who they are? Another major pattern that leads us sometimes down the wrong track is confirmation bias. It is the idea that we tend to look for what we expect to see. And that is a filter that influences our perception and our understanding of what's out there. And so what is very important about confirmation bias is that we then disconfirm evidence that challenges our expectation and our assumption, and we only gather information that reinforces it. If I think that you don't care about me, I will interpret and look for every situation where you did something that I can then see as being uncaring. But you may have a long list of other things you did that are very caring, and I will disregard them, I will minimize them. And this is not because I don't want to see you caring, but it is almost as if our brain is set up for us to maintain coherence of the way we perceive reality. Of course, what I'm going to suggest to you all is that when you see yourself caught in a confirmation bias, you set yourself up for a special tracking day. And today, you're going to look just for everything the other person does, your manager, your colleague, your partner, that you felt was attentive and caring and warm toward you. You will begin to see how we miss those because we are so focused on finding the ones that we expect to see. A third cognitive trap that we fall into, and that is the always and never. That kind of totalistic thinking. By the moment you say to someone, you never do this, I promise you that the first thing that you're going to hear is an example from them about the one time that they actually did do this. When people say always and never, the totalistic aspect of it is inaccurate much of the time, but more importantly, it is presented like a fact. This is true. If I say you never do this, you always say that, it is likely that what I'm emphasizing is my experience of what you say. It is a subjective receiving of how you behave. It isn't an accurate statement. As you work on developing empathy, another essential building block in relational intelligence, I want you to keep in mind the following. Don't make assumptions, correct your mistakes, be curious and ask questions, and be aware of cognitive distortions, confirmation bias, and totalistic thinking. There is no universal set of norms when it comes to relational behaviors. There are a few relational principles that are essential, that have to do with respect and dignity and not to humiliate people, etc. But for the rest, how we interact with each other, there are so many ways. Like there are many languages on this planet, there are many relational languages as well. So don't take yours as the norm. And that will help you be curious that other people think, feel, react, and do differently from you. Every relationship is defined by its boundaries. Every human being is defined by its boundaries. What is me and what is not me? What is inside of me and what is outside of me? In this chapter, we're going to talk about personal boundaries and work boundaries. So, what is a boundary? A boundary is a container so that you know what stays inside, what belongs here, in terms of content, material, feelings, information, secrets, you name it. It's a container. And at its best, a boundary becomes a safe container so that I can comfortably live inside of this. That is the most important definition around boundaries, is about connection and separateness. It's about letting people in and opening up, or about limiting and creating separateness and knowing where you stop and where the other starts so that not everything becomes a part of you. Sometimes there is this misconception that if people have boundaries, it prevents them from connecting. But actually, it is because there are boundaries between people that there is a sense of how the connection actually gets made as these people come closer to each other. If there were no boundaries, it may be one person melding into another, but that is not a connection, that is a fusion. What does it mean when people say, I have good boundaries, or I don't have good boundaries? It's a colloquial thing, but what do people actually mean with that? Is it a matter of, I take responsibilities for things that I shouldn't? Or I remain too indifferent about things that actually should be my responsibility, but I stay away from them? Do I take on other people's feelings too much, as if they're my problem? Or do I actually stay away and I don't know enough how to connect and blend myself with another person's experience because I am so separate? I think the best image for a boundary in relationship is our skin. If our skin didn't have pores and couldn't breathe and take things in from the outside, it would dry off and die. If our skin is opened, has wounds all the time, then it cannot function either because it gets hurt. So it needs small holes that allow the external environment to feed it, and at the same time, it is tight enough that it can protect everything that is inside. I use the skin because it is the most important boundary that lives on us. A relationship has a boundary. It is the skin that envelops it. And sometimes that boundary can be very porous, very permeable. Everything can enter. Everybody else's opinion, everything can suddenly shake it. And sometimes it has a good membrane that something comes in, you check it, you decide if it's going to go in, or you decide to not let it come in. Or relationships can have very tight boundaries around it. Nobody can enter. No other opinion, no other person. It's really close to the world outside. So boundaries are either permeable or soft, flexible membranes or very rigid envelopes. You can ask yourself, in your relationships, the ones that you grew up in, your family is a very good one to start with, what was the relationship of the family to the outside world? Were the boundaries around your family unit permeable, flexible, or rigid? How so? Now, look at any of your other relationships, a romantic partner, a close friend, a coworker, and take some time to describe the boundaries around each. So if you bring the question of boundaries also inside a company, so it takes place at every level of the structure. One of the classic situations in a work environment about boundaries are connected to trust. The ability to say something to somebody and it doesn't travel through the whole floor. That's a boundary. Trust is a boundary. It says what you said stays with me and doesn't go elsewhere. There's no leakage. Leakage is a lack of boundary. Transparency can be a boundary or a lack thereof. So when you look inside a company, what you want to understand about boundaries are the roles clearly defined. That is a boundary too. Are the responsibilities taken by those who should be taking those responsibilities, or are they distributed sometimes unfairly? That's a boundary issue. You know, one person did something, but it's not that person who takes responsibility. It suddenly appears right on this side. That's a boundary issue. One of the very important questions around boundaries is what belongs in the workplace? Do you bring your problems to the workplace? Do you have to talk about certain situations to the workplace? How much of your personal life comes to work? It used to be we keep our personal life and we go to work and this doesn't belong there. This is not the case. From the moment we all work from home, the boundary has shifted. I think we've always brought our whole self to work. It's just that we do it unconsciously. It's not perceived as such, but everybody brings their whole self to work all the time. They may talk about it or they may not talk about it. Today, there is an expectation we talk about it. If there is a shooting and it affects me, I expect that affecting may be part of how I behave in the workplace, and that there will be certain dispositions made for me to be able to leave early, to not come tomorrow, to have a moment of silence. I bring my reality with me to work. It's also my political reality. It's not just my personal reality. And that is a real shift in boundaries that a certain generation before would have said that does not have its place on the work floor. Today it does. The question that we often face around boundaries in relationships is what do we do with the fact that people are different from us? And how much do we try to make them become like us? Because we think that our relative perception is not relative. We think that that's how it should be. We perceive the rigidity of another person's boundaries on the basis of the fact that ours are looser. These are relative positions. Of course, sometimes there is true rigidity to it because we understand that the person that doesn't let anything in, it is rigid. And the person who lets everything in, it is too loose and too chaotic. But fundamentally, our perception is based on our norm. So you are rigid for me because I'm less so. And I may be too loose to you because I'm more so. That's a very important thing to understand. Boundaries is probably one of the most ongoing negotiations in relationships from day one till the end. A very important boundary, for example, is how people take care of themselves. If they go to the doctor, don't go to the doctor, what they eat, how healthy, how much they maintain themselves. What do I do when you don't want to live according to my recommendations? And I may have the best intentions. I want to protect you. I want you to be healthy and so forth. It's really one of the most, this is the full extent of boundary, is how much are we able to accept the other person as they are and let them live their life as they want to live it instead of how we want them to live it. Every relationship negotiates that all the time. Those who do better, live better. So to me, a dysfunction of boundaries are relationships that are enmeshed, that are too fused. There is no boundary. Everything that happens to one person happens to the other. There is no clear sense of where one person stops and the other one starts. What's my experience? What's your experience? What's my anxiety? What's your anxiety? What's my sadness? What's your sadness? There is none of it. When people are fused, there is a disruption of boundary. Sometimes there's a separation between the two people and the world around them. They're like this, and nothing can enter. That's a boundary. On the other side, sometimes the boundary is so thick that one person can be gone for 4 days and the other one barely mentioned it or noticed it. Or one person hasn't said a word in 4 days and the other person also doesn't react to that. Too much space is a boundary issue. There is too much indifference, too much space. It cannot be that one person is sick and the other person hasn't paid attention. That is a problem. It's too extended. So too far and too close are probably the most common dysfunctions of boundaries. When we meet someone, it's a very interesting way that boundaries move. The boundary moves means that you get more license to ask for certain things, to say certain things that previously were not yet part of a relationship where you don't know the person. What also happens is the negotiation with our personal worlds. I'm going to this event. At the beginning, I'm going to this event. There is no expectation that you should come with me to this event. But as we get to know each other more and as we become more involved, I start to have an expectation that if I go to my friend's birthday party, you're going to join me. That's a boundary shift. The shift from I to us is one of the most important boundary shifts as people become more involved with each other. What is mine and what is ours? What do I owe to tell you? What can I keep personal and private to myself is a boundary question. There is no relationship that we have that hasn't gone through this whole negotiation. But sometimes it's conscious and sometimes it's internal. Everybody negotiates boundaries all the time. Do I tell you how much I spend on this thing? At what point do I have to tell you? Is it mine? Is it ours? And who says it's okay? As you reflect, keep in mind, boundaries delineate what is shared and what is separate, what is public and what is private, where we connect and where we diverge. It's about where one entity stops and the other one starts. Every place, person, relationship has boundaries. Every company, every culture has boundaries. Boundaries can be permeable, flexible, or rigid. Boundaries are relative, and boundaries evolve as the relationship evolves. When you ask yourself some basic self-awareness questions about boundaries, it's simply this. Do I see myself at this moment in my life, because we start with the now, as someone who could use loosening my boundaries a little bit or strengthening my boundaries a little bit? That's the first question. Is it about opening up and therefore allowing things to enter? Or is it about creating more of a container, more of a boundary, so that I can protect what is inside and keep certain things on the outside? Now, you may say it depends on the relationship. That is true. The boundary is not just an essential part of who we are. The boundary is also negotiated in our interaction with others. It doesn't just exist alone. It's both and. And then you look at the partner you picked or the partners you've picked over time. That's a very interesting thing. Is there good complementarity? Is this a place that helps me actually do the thing that I need to do in my own experience of growth? Or is this an environment that actually strengthens my defenses? or my coping strategies. This is for all of us, all the time. And then you'll ask yourself, when have been good experiences that have helped me strengthen the part of me that I want to develop more? And what were those situations? And how can I replicate them? Power is intrinsic to all relationships, whether at work or at home. And interestingly, these days we talk more about expectations, boundaries, trust. We don't talk enough about power. And when we do talk about power in relationships, we tend to emphasize abuses of power. I would like to simply invite you to understand that all relationships imply dynamics of power. It's neutral. It's not in and of itself good or bad. So power, I want to demystify the word first and foremost, because instantly I feel that often people cringe when you say power in relation. Yes, power. When a child needs their parent, the parent has power over the child. You know, we are the most helpless creature that comes into the world for a good year, before we can talk, we can feed ourselves, we can clothe ourselves. So we depend on caregivers, and that gives these caregivers power. At the same time, if we have a 2-year-old who says no and doesn't want to do what we ask them, everybody understands that power doesn't always come from the top down. It also can come from the bottom up. So how do we handle power in relationships? And how do we understand what we can do with the power, the generative power, but also what can be done destructively with power, is the big question that all relationships ask themselves. Power comes with the fact that when people need each other, rely on each other, have expectations from each other, depend on each other, it gives them power. It gives the other person power. But the question always is it power over or is it power to? Power over you can be oppressive, can be dominant, can be exploitative. But power to can be generative, can be inviting, can be active and collaborative. People often will say the person that makes more money has power in a relationship. That is possible. But then it can be, therefore, that person who makes more money makes more decisions, gets to decide where we live, what we spend the money on, etc. Or that person may say, you know, you've been wanting to go back to school for a long time. I can make that happen for you. Go ahead. Or you've been wanting to go back and do your artwork. Or you would like to take some time to take care of your ailing parent at this point. I can make that possible for you. That is power too. The other thing is I use my power to create an imbalance, rather than I use my power to create a collaborative or generative experience together. Power is an organizational feature of relationships. So in some situations, there needs to be leadership. Leadership is power too. It provides hierarchy. Hierarchy provides structure. Parents who don't assume their position, their role, their authority, their power, leave a vacuum. That vacuum often creates a reversal of power where the child has to become the parent of the parents. These are inversed hierarchies. Those become problematic. Employees that don't have a boss that gives them a clear sense of direction and mission and where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing are left with a vacuum. And then they ask, what should we do? And then sometimes another person emerges that becomes the new power, or it's chaos and disorganization. Same in political systems and how we manage society. Groups, societies need structure. That involves power. That power is either voted, chosen, attributed, earned, or stolen. I think what's important to highlight about power is that power is at once structural and also interpersonal. I come from a generation, and certainly my parents come from a generation, where people who had more power, that meant more authority, that was the definition of power, who were higher up in the hierarchy. When they told me what to do, I did not discuss it. I didn't question it. I didn't argue it, because I came from a model that people with more power tell the people with less power what to do, and so it is. My children are in a different generation at this moment, where in the laterality of new structures, they don't question the power, but they may have questions about what the person in power is saying or asking them to do or suggesting. So power has become more fluid. Power gets negotiated. Power is not just something that is ascribed and assigned to you by virtue of your age, of your birth, and of your status. It is part of the relational dynamics. And this is very new in relationships. Power that is negotiated is something new that came with the women's movement, that came with the identity politics, that is part of a larger cultural issue in which your power can be taken away with the Me Too movement too. Power is no longer something that is just fixed and you got it and it's part of your privilege forever. There still are plenty of people who have that kind of power too, but there is also a new experience of power that is much more fluid and much more negotiated. If you are in a company and you have less power and you are more junior and you want to bring something up, the first thing you need to do is look at the culture around you. You look at the context. When I just described how power used to be fixed and it is now negotiated, it's a cultural shift. In order to know what you can bring to people who are in power above you at your company, you need to look at the company. What is the culture of this place? Are young people allowed to make suggestions? Are their opinions worthy? Are they invited? Or do you wait your years before you can speak up? The culture will tell you most often how you can address people in power and question their power or question certain decisions or bring certain ideas. And then watch your manager and watch the people above you and how they respond to others. Collect information or go and talk to the other people on the floor or on Zoom and ask them, is this a place where people do these kind of things, or is this a place where you wait? I have an image that always stays with me when I think about, how you negotiate power, which I was giving a talk in an Eastern European country with strong hierarchies. And the professor was sitting here, and the room had, 1,000 people, but a lot of them were the student of the professor. And I noticed that when I would ask a question to the audience, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about what I just said? It could be something really simple like that. Or is this the way this happens in this country too? People didn't answer me. They first looked to the professor. And when the professor went like this, then people knew what they could answer. And I saw, this is hierarchy, this is structure, this is power. Everyone was clear. There was a consensus around the norm of where the power center lies and therefore how it affects everybody else. You learn when you enter a culture, a family, a company, what the power dynamics are, where the power center is, and how much challenge to the center you can express. The questions that you ask yourself when you want to understand who has power is, what are the criterions that determine power? Is it the people who are more responsible? In your romantic relationships, in your family relationships, is it the person that is more competent? Or is it the person that is more incompetent? Is it the person that earns more money? Is it the person that makes more decisions? What do you think makes for the power? So when you say, she has all the power, with what? My boss has all the power. Or this person on my team has way too much power. What do you mean? That their opinions matter more? That they disqualify others? That some people only listen to them? I think you start with, this person has power. The next question is, how so? What confers them the power? Do they take it? Do they grab it? Or is it given to them? What is the relational dynamic around it? Have people given up? They just let the person talk. They don't respond even. They barely listen. Watch the systemic organization around the power. How is the system, the couple, the family, the group, the team, the company, organized around the power? And how does it maintain the power structure in place? The power equity or the power inequity in place? The tendency is to think that the most competent one, this is true for families as well as romantic relationships, that the most competent one, the most successful one, the most earning one has power. But the same way that I say power can come from the bottom up from a child, it can also be so with adults. For example, in many relationships, you have one person who has an addiction, or who is depressed, or who can't get their act together, or who can't keep a job. And that person also has power. The depressed person, they don't experience themselves as powerful. But systemically, what they feel inside is very different than what happens between them and others. If I am down, most of the time the people around me are going to try to cheer me up. They're going to give me all kinds of advice of what I need to do to feel better, to get my energy back, etc. And I will say no, 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 no. And in the end, many of these very wise advice givers will end up feeling as helpless as me. And this is a very important understanding of power. So power is probably the most important. For me, it's one of the most important dynamics to understand in a relationship. When you say, where lies the power? Who has the power? And power for what? As you reflect on power, I'd like you to keep this in mind. Power is intrinsic in all relationships, and power structures are more fluid now. There's no relationship that doesn't have a power dimension. You can have power over, and you can have power to. Hence, power can be oppressive and or generative. Power comes both from the top down and from the bottom up. And remember, be discerning about the kind of power that people hold, how they've come to have it, how they are supported to keep it, and how it affects others around them. I'm going to give you another little exercise to do, is to take a little scan of some of the important relationships in your life. And again, you can choose your romantic ones, family ones, friendships, work situations, all of the above. And just ask yourself, what is my experience of power in my relationships? Do I feel that I have agency, that I have power, initiative, action, that I can freely express? Do I feel that I'm often at the hands of other people and their power over me? Have I switched back and forth? Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there. And what made it change every time? The main question is not do I have power, but do I have agency? Can I take certain steps separately from what you are doing to me or to us? And that is important. The opposite of agency becomes codependency. And just write the stories down for yourself. Get a bit of a profile. This is going to give you a host of information about how you have experienced power, the power of others and your own. When you step into your power, when you are meek, when you deny it, when you're bold, when you resist it, when you're afraid of it, all of your responses to the position of power itself. Something that the other one doesn't want to join. And this is the first time they find themselves possibly going in separate directions. What I also learned is that one of them is an only child, and the other the youngest of 5. And that difference tells us a lot about their identity and about the role that they play as adults. If you are a solo child and you live with solo parent or sola parent, it becomes sometimes more difficult to be able to have separate opinions.
Yes, that's accurate. I also think that, and I'm not sure how this plays with the whole being an only child, but like, I'm actually pretty easily convinced when a logical argument is presented to me. And he's a salesman, he can sell his ideas, and he knows how to sell them to me without a whole lot of
Can I ask you
trouble.
something?
Sure.
Was your mom good at that?
I don't know, I wonder. We grew up with my grandparents. You know, my dad died when I was 2.5, so it was just me and her, and we moved in with my grandparents, who were the best. They were awesome. So, we didn't have any money, so she had to fend for us both, you know, from the start. So, I mean, she's just an incredible woman, the things that she was able to do with nothing. You know, my dad had a business that was terrible. It was an aviation business. He had it because he loved aviation, not because he was good at business.
And you became a pilot?
Yes. No, not surprisingly, yeah. But when he died, she was stuck with this business and trying to figure out what to do, felt the responsibility to the business, the dream, and to the employees. And she, you know, in a couple of years, she got that business from the red into the black and sold it. I look back at that and go, wow, that's incredible. So I don't think anybody was ever telling her what to do. So I don't know the answer to that question.
Because you're thinking of it as an issue of command and control.
Sure, that's the way I think of a lot of things.
Right. I wasn't thinking about it from that side. I was thinking about it as, if you'd give me a good argument, I can be convinced, A, because I think it's a sound argument,
Yes.
and 2, because I thrive on harmony.
Yes.
I thrive on harmony with my grandparents, I thrive on harmony with my mom, and I thrive on harmony with my business partner.
Yes. I would say that of 10 door closing sessions where whiskey's poured, 9 of them are initiated by Mike.
That means what?
I don't
I avoid conflict.
avoid conflict.
I chose a nicer way of saying it, but that's what I do.
Yeah.
To me, the minute you tell me, I love and I admire my mother. I love and I so deeply appreciate my grandparents. And I was this only child. I know you are a pleaser. But not in a pleaser in the sense that you want to have a nice relationship with people that you are fond of, that you love, that you admire, that you respect so much as you respect her. It's that. You don't want to disappoint them. It's absolutely not a negative trait at all. But like every trait, it takes place in a context.
Sure.
It's the context that determines if it's a useful one today or if it's more detrimental to me today. Same with him. Why is he so good at convincing? because he's got 4 other brothers, and they all have a big mouth, and he has to get his point of view across. He had a training ground from day one. It's like the context of how you grew up exquisitely sharpened certain skills by necessity. And they, of course, come with you to work. There's a difference of the role of the youngest of 5 and the single child, of the one who has 2 parents in the house with them and the one who has their mother, who is a widow, living with the grandparents. Those circumstances, those contexts are very important in shaping the kinds of roles that will become leading parts for each of these men in their life. The one that had 4 brothers really learned to become more assertive, convincing, a good salesman, as he said, in order to be heard by these 4 older brothers. The one who lived alone with a mom that he deeply admired and grandparents to whom he was so grateful to, learned to be more accommodating, learned to preserve harmony, learned to understand that it wasn't so important to get their point of view across, because what was more important was to preserve the connection. If we go back to our first class, the segment about autonomy versus interdependence, this is a perfect example. One person's circumstances honed his autonomous skills, his getting my point across, making sure that I am heard. The other one's circumstances honed his interdependent skills, his loyalty skills. And those meant less important for me to think about what I believe and less important for me to argue my point and much more important for me to preserve harmony. We begin to also see how these different roles are influencing the way they deal with hard issues, tough conversations, even conflicts, to the point when one says, all the conversations about tough stuff for which we need to close door and pour some whiskey, they are initiated by him. Because he is not afraid of the conflict, because he's less worried about the disruption of the harmony and the loyalty. Whereas me, I'm a people pleaser. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a negative thing. It just gives you a sense of how our roles are learned and cultivated in the history and the story of our relationships and our early life. A role is a portion of a script. You cannot play a role without having other people play another role, like in a play, unless you do a monologue. But if you are in relationships, one role invites another role. A good team or a good relationship has good complementarity of roles. For example, one person says, we need to hire more people. And that person is always in the role of expansion. Bigger, newer, more, you name it. You can apply this to work, you can apply this to home as well. And the other one always goes, we can't yet. We should do it slower, step by step. One says to the other, you're going too fast. One says to the other, you're going too slow. Or you go too big and you go too small. They're the same. When you understand interdependent parts, the only reason I can continue constantly say we should go slower is because I have somebody here who says we should go faster. I can be who I am and think the way I do because you are filling the missing pieces. You are highlighting the parts that I don't want to address. And that becomes fairness. That's the most important thing to understand about a role. If you didn't have other people play the other parts, you would have to incorporate all the parts yourself, and that's a lot to carry. So one of the things people often ask me is, where is the equality? And my suggestion to you is that it is probably more conducive to find equity in a relationship than to look for equality in a relationship. And equity means that you have a sense that it is fair, that people are not abusing of their role, that they're not using the power of their role in a way that feels unfair to you. In a hierarchical situation between a boss and an employee, you don't look at equity by measuring do they have equal or fair distribution of decision-making. But you are looking at is the role that the employee has been assigned able to be executed with the proper decision-making that belongs to that role. That's what will make it equitable. Recently someone was saying to me, in my relationship, one person does all the cooking and one person does all the dishes. And, it works out well for us. It's like, it's equal. And I said, no, it's not equal. It's fair. Because you don't do the same things that are distributed equally. But you have a sense that each of you basically is either doing the thing you like the most, or each of you is either doing the thing that each of you dislike the least. It can go in both directions. I love the question of where can roles go wrong? Because roles go wrong primarily when you always play the same role and when they become rigid and there is a demand for it to change. For example, one person at home had the role of, let's say, raising the children, but their partner dies, or their partner has an illness, or their partner can no longer fulfill their role. So now this person has to step into the role of the person who has vacated the position. You have to be able to experience the flexibility of entering into that role. And that's a challenge if you've never had to do so. What happens to us is that we suddenly are thrown into a role and I don't know what to do. The day I became a mother, I suddenly was thrust into a role. The day I become a company CEO, I'm thrust into a role. How do I do these things? So we learn, we get coached, we do a lot of things in order to inhabit these roles. Usually we get groomed for a role, but sometimes we are unprepared for the role and we're just thrown into it. So when do roles go wrong? When sometimes we suddenly have to enact a role that is too unknown to us and we don't know what to do. When we are in a role that is beyond our capacities, when we are unable to change our roles even though the demand around us has shifted. One of the big changes that I'm noticing in the workplace, in the relationship between manager and employee, is that for a long time, we saw the manager as the person who is basically trying to meet the demands of the people above them. And so they give feedback in order to be able to deliver on their mandate. A manager today is much more of a coach. And the expectation is that there's going to be a back and forth between my work, but also who I am, how I am growing here, my degree of self-fulfillment, and you're going to help me become a better person. And that often puts managers today in a bit of a conundrum. Like, I'm here to talk about work. Why are we here suddenly talking about housing situations, romantic relationships, family situations? And of course, there is a broadening of the conversation and of the boundary around the relationship between managers and employees in many instances these days. So I think that this is part of why I've often loved the thought of couples therapy with my manager. So sometimes I may say to the manager, it looks like you're finding yourself in a role that you didn't audition for. You thought you were here only to talk about work, and here you are talking about a host of things that you probably don't have much of an idea what to do with. This is true in relationships as well. Imagine you became the problem solver. You became the person who is always doing the bills. You became the person who does all the organization of the house. And you find yourself saying, how did I get there? I am suddenly playing a part I never auditioned for. And this is one of the things that show the power of a relationship, is that two individuals or more create a relationship, but the relationship also ends up defining the individual. And so now you ask yourself, what are some of the relationships where you find yourself in a part that you didn't audition for? Take a moment and jot it down for yourself. And how many of you would like to resign from some of these roles? And what would it take? Because the fear that we have, if we are the ones in this example always doing it, is that if I don't do it, nobody else will. So the role is accompanied by a belief. The belief keeps the role rigid. The role keeps the belief from changing. Challenge yourself on some of these and see what happens. The first question I'd like you to ask yourself is, what roles do you play in your life? Peacemaker, diplomat, truth teller, cheerleader, the responsible one, the disciplinarian, caregiver, provider, group therapist, the icebreaker, the planner, the anchor. And now ask yourself, is there a good diversity of roles? I mean, who wants to play the same play all the time? There's a repertoire. Is there diversity in your repertoire of roles? Do you find that certain roles are old? You've done them for years, and it's like, it doesn't really make sense anymore. Is there a role that you wish you could play more often? There's a lot of power in knowing the roles that you play. So really, take your time to examine with whom you play which role, how you've come to play them, and how you feel about the roles that you play. Were you assigned your role? Did you take it on? Did you stumble into it? And what do you think would happen if you didn't play that part? What would be the consequences of change? You may find out that you have been living in relationships, playing a role for a long time that you don't want to do anymore. Then then take this as really important information and maybe make some decisions. You may realize that you have been living with basically an inauthentic sense of yourself because you were doing things that no longer feed you, meet you, represent you. In that sense, you're in the wrong role. Sometimes you may find that when you say I'm not in the right role, it may resonate with I'm not in the right relationship. To change a relationship often means to change the role you play in the relationship. One of the very important aspects of relationships, and relational intelligence for that matter, is how do we have difficult conversations? How do we break up with someone? How do we tell someone that they can't continue work here? How do we give feedback? How do we make ourselves vulnerable in having a difficult conversation? And how do we bring out the vulnerability in others as we have a difficult conversation with them? Difficult conversations sometimes are defined by the topic, what it is that we need to be talking about. I think that what is more significant and more challenging about them, and why we often are so reluctant and avoidant, and we know we have to call that person, we know we have to have this conversation, and it just doesn't happen, is because what we dread is the feelings that these conversations will drudge up, particularly hurt or pain and anger. Before we start thinking together about difficult conversations, I want to ask you to just jot down first things that come to mind. 1, 2, 3 difficult conversations that you remember having had or need to have. These difficult conversations can be with someone else, but let me even throw in, what's a difficult conversation that you need to have with yourself? If I need to prepare for a difficult conversation, I know it instantly. I can tell you really personally. The difficult conversations start for me in my belly. I feel the knot. I feel anxious. I don't know what sometimes I'm actually worried about, but I know this is a conversation that triggers high stress in me. Sometimes it's because of what I fear I may feel, and sometimes it's because I'm afraid of what the other person may feel. So you ask yourself, difficult conversation, what is the obstacle? What stands in the way? What am I intensely aware of as I'm about to have this conversation? A difficult conversation is a difficult conversation, will be a difficult conversation. There's a lot of things we can do, but it doesn't change the nature of the conversation. I'm going to tell you the things you can do, but I'm also going to tell you what people say when you're doing them. For example, the classic one is to say, let me start with all the good things. And everybody is waiting for the other shoe to drop, because it is already prepared as such as I'm going to first lay out the good stuff, and then I'm going to tell you your fate. We think that we are softening it by first starting with what is really special about you or what you've done so well here at work. Nevertheless, we're going to have to let you go. I promise you, we know the fate of a conversation sometimes in advance. So I am waiting for the shoe to drop, then I'm not hearing any of the positive thing you're telling me. You should do the positive thing first, but just so you know, the other person is preparing the whole time for the next part. So the first thing is, of course, the classic ones of saying the positive things first. The other one is to say how hard it is for you to have this conversation. This is not just difficult for you, this is also really difficult for me. I wish I wouldn't have to have this conversation, but out of respect for you, I'm going to try to do it in the best way possible. But no, this is painful for you, and this is painful for me too. That is probably the most important one. And now, they may believe you and they may not. They may say, but if you really loved me as much as I love you, you wouldn't be having this conversation. So obviously, it's not that painful to you. That's not true. I may not want to stay with you, but nevertheless, I care deeply about you and your well-being, and I have no desire to hurt you. So state the challenge for you as well. The next thing is to say, I have been on the other side. What I'm about to do is really difficult because I remember vividly when someone else had that conversation with me. Let the person know that you're not insensitive to what may be happening to them and that you have been on the other side, that in life, in relationships, most of the time, we've been on all sides of the spectrum. For everything we do today, it's been done to us at another time. There's one piece of research that I've always found very interesting, and it's more so for couples. maybe even friends as well, is that when people need to have a difficult conversation, if they actually have the hand of the other person on them, on their knee, on their shoulder, that it actually calms the nervous system and it allows people to have a difficult conversation in a way that is more regulated. I think that's very important information, because if I'm saying something challenging to you while I'm doing this, I am caring for you at the same time as I am challenging you. And I think that is that juxtaposition that is very, very important in how people go through these conversations. The next one is to say, this is not our only conversation. Because if I deliver tough news to you, generally, there's a chance you may freeze. And you may not even hear, after I've said one sentence, you don't hear the rest anymore because you are in complete protection mode. So it's extremely important to say, we will be able to come back to this. Because how many times have you left the conversation and said, I wish I had said this, if only I had done that. And we ruminate and we obsess about it and we wish we had a second chance. Let a person know, in a couple of days, I want to resume, I want to come back and see if there's anything that is important for us to mention that we may not have mentioned today. Because then the person leaves, is not busy with the sense, I will never be able to ever say this. You know, that's it. It was a one-time chance and I blew it. No, there is not a one-time chance. Difficult conversations are often not a one-time conversation. I think that often we think of them as once you put the whole thing in it and you just deliver the bomb. No, it can be a small grenade and another one. So saying the positive things first isn't just in order to be nice, but it creates a context that enables you and the other person to listen more openly to what comes next. It sometimes also helps to acknowledge that this is a difficult conversation. And for the other person, it may be helpful to add that you've been on their side before. There's very interesting research that shows that appropriate physical touch can bring connection to a challenging exchange. And let them know that this is not your only conversation. Another very typical difficult conversation is to give negative feedback. It's basically to go and say something critical. And I would say that on the criticism front or on the feedback front, there are major generational differences at this moment. And cultural differences. I grew up in a school system where 80 was for the student, 90 was for the teacher, and 100 was for God. So there was a criticism system in place. When you got your papers corrected, there was read about everything that you did wrong and maybe a tiny little paragraph at the end that said, this was a good paper. And then you got your grade. So that is a cultural system that says people get pushed by getting criticism rather than people get pushed by getting compliments and reinforcements. That's a very classic feedback question. What motivates people to change better? I live today in the United States and I send my children to school and I see the way that they were graded was the exact opposite. Everything that was positive and then maybe you should consider, and then came a few things that they could do for improvement. That's a very different way to create reinforcement, motivation, and a sense of self. So sometimes in the workplace, you have people from different cultures and people from different generations who have a different sense as to what will push someone. So before you give feedback, generally, you already have some sense of who is the person that you're giving feedback to. You need to look at the context. You've watched this person in interaction with others, and you have a sense. Some, if you are too gentle, will think you're just bullshitting them. And some, if you are too harsh, will think that you are unduly critical of them. What I'm saying is that the feedback is also defined by the person you're giving the feedback to, not just your own norms. One of the things that make a conversation difficult is how we anticipate the reaction of the other person, right? So one part is what I have to say and what I'm going to do to you, but the other one is what you may do to me. So a classic challenge of difficult conversation is I know in advance that once I'm going to talk to this person, they're going to react to me defensively. Defensiveness is probably one of the biggest ones, right? It's like it doesn't matter how I bring something up. Some people, knee-jerk, the first thing they say is, what about you? You too. And you want to say, I was first. I brought this up. Why can't we talk about this first? What you really want is to separate the distinction between criticizing something a person has done with being critical of the person altogether. This is the same for ourselves. We can have critical thinking about our work without having to launch into a self-criticism about the person we are. That is a fundamental distinction in feedback. And what you will notice is that some people, even when you do that, because of how they grew up and how they were treated, it is very difficult for them to make that distinction. They cannot not personalize the commentary. They make it about them and not about it. the best thing you can do is say, listen, I know this is hard to hear, that may not be what you anticipated, what you wished for, but I feel like I would not be respectful and caring if I didn't say this to you right now. And I also hope that you see the well-meaning that I bring to this. And while I'm saying this to you, I have sat with people where I've said exactly that, and I thought I was being caring and warm and concerned, and they could feel none of it. And that belongs to them. So I did the best I could, but I couldn't get through to them because no matter how I tried, they saw me in the persecutor role. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not telling you don't do it. I just want you to be realistic and humble so that you understand the difference between shaping the outcome of an interaction and controlling the outcome of an interaction. You shape it by doing your part. And what you did was the right thing to do. But that doesn't mean that you can determine how the other person will respond. In the end, that is part of their sovereignty to react the way they do. You can influence it. You can shape it. You can't control it. We've just talked about the difficult conversations that are about things I need to say to you. But there are also difficult conversations about the things that I want to say about myself. Conversations that reveal something challenging, painful, conflictual, internal. Conversations that make me feel very vulnerable because I instantly wonder, how will it be received? Will it push you away? Will you push me away? Will it make you look down on me? Will it make you judgmental of me? So conversations that bring out, I guess the best word is vulnerability here, that demand courage, that demand the ability to hold on to myself, all the while I'm not sure if you're going to continue to hold on to me. Those are very precious, difficult conversations that we have to also include here. A conversation that you need to have or that you want to have always is accompanied by, why do I want to say this to you? What do I hope will happen when I say this to you? How do I wish you respond to me when I say this to you? And what would happen if I did not say this to you? And do this little thing in advance. Sometimes you want to share something. But if you're not going to get a caring, benevolent response, and you're only going to be pushed down or accused for the very thing that you've just revealed that was so vulnerable, what's the point? So many of us who experience trauma earlier on in our life, it's not about the event that we experienced. It's the fact that we experienced it in a context that lacked empathic responses. And so that piece is essential to difficult conversations. Many people have histories where they revealed very painful personal things to those who needed to care for them and got no response. You have got to think about that when you want to bring something deeply personal to someone. Remember, a difficult conversation is just that, difficult. And we can't expect an uncomfortable conversation to be easy just because we're doing it mindfully. Consider generational and cultural context. And while you can't control someone's reaction, you do have a hand in shaping it. Ask the other person what they'd like to get out of the conversation, and be clear about your own goal. There's absolutely no way we can have a course on relationships and not talk about the most juicy topic of them all, conflict. And the way we manage conflict in relationships. What do we mean by conflict? And how it is essential for the well-being of people in relationships to have a good way, or as good a way as possible, to deal with conflict. Sometimes people say, how can I enter conflict? And I would say we don't enter conflict, we create conflict. Conflict is the outcome. The first thing is, why does something become a conflict? Is an important question to ask. For some people, simple disagreements are experienced like sources of conflict. Every one of us learned in our growing up, family, community, political reality, racial reality, how to respond to conflict, how to live in conflictual situations. And we learned them at home, and we learned what price we paid when we spoke up, and what price we paid when we didn't say anything, or what we gained from not saying anything, or what we gained from speaking up, from fighting for something. And we watched how other people dealt with disagreement, dealt with power struggles. This is probably one of the most important things we learn, watching other people around us. You know, how did people deal when they were humiliated, or when they were shamed, or when they were feeling guilty, or when they were dissed, and what they did with their anger. Because conflict is directly connected to our experience of anger, frustration, disappointment, hurt. Conflict is the expression of all these feelings, often when they are not handled well. A conflict is basically an ascending curve from something that is a discord, a disagreement, a challenge, and it goes all the way to an explosion. It's an ascending curve, conflict. Don't think of it as something static. It moves. So I want you to see the complexity of conflict, that it's not just fighting and arguing, but that conflict is an overall situational ecology that we have either learned to live with and plunge into, or often on the other side have learned to avoid like the plague because it felt so dangerous and so threatening. And what will be interesting is if you notice who are the people that are close to you, and is their experience of conflict similarly as yours? What you often find in a relationship, there's only 3 dances around this. It's 2 fighters, 2 distancers, or 1 fighter and 1 fleer. Imagine I want to discuss something with you, and you say, not now. At my worst, sometimes I can be the person who follows you through the house. You go into the room, I start knocking at the door. I follow you in the room. I am not going to be able to stop this until we've got this thing figured out and discussed. Does this work? No, it generally doesn't. Because the more I run after you, if you are the one who tends to close off or needs to cool down first, or needs to be able to think and gather your thoughts, and said to me, not now because I'm overwhelming you and I'm flooding you, then the more I run after you, the more I strengthen your need for space, for distance, for closing the door. What you insist on persists. I am going to make you even more of a withdrawer by virtue of the way that I pursue you at this moment of conflict. What would help me more? If you say to me, not now, I will say to you, you have complete legitimate space here to say, I can't have this discussion right now. Fair enough. But then you have to be the one to re-engage with it, so that you don't put me in the position now of the one who's waiting and waiting and waiting because you never come back. Because if you had it your way, we would never be discussing this thing. So that is then going to make me become more of a pursuer again, because your reluctance and avoidance is strengthening my desperation about when are we ever going to talk about this or address this or whatever the issue is. So first of all, understand that in mismanagement of conflict, each person, by virtue of their stance, is going to reinforce the position of the other, which is often the opposite of what they actually want. So watch what you do. You won't get the conversation you want if you can't accept that the other person has to engage with you when they actually can engage with you and can actually hear you, which is what you want in the first place. The fighter and the fighter who do conflict in the way that I highly recommend you not to do are people who often will do what is commonly called kitchen sinking. Means we're arguing about this, and within 2 seconds, Nali, I'll give you 20 seconds, I've already brought up that and that from 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I am piling up all the dirty dishes in one sink, and it's everything that you've ever done that has annoyed me is right there, when in fact we began to talk about why you were late last night. That's 2 fighters for you. They escalate very quickly. They bring in the stuff. And if one person ends up saying, okay, I understand, I accept this, and what about that? Because they're not done. They've got something else to bring in. And so it becomes very explosive very quickly, and each one attacking the other, and often the other person then defending themselves and counterattacking. I don't have to tell you that you can't wash all the dishes at the same time if they're all piled up on each other in the sink. It's a very clear image. You know, pick a dish and stick to it. And don't start piling up the entire history. You're destroying your relationship when you do that. Doesn't matter if it's between friends, your romantic partner, your family member, or at work. That attitude is so painful because there is nothing left. And people sometimes fight as if they have nothing to lose, when in fact they have everything to lose. So this is one of the styles of handling conflict that is really problematic. Is there something you want to discuss? Is there something you're fighting about? You didn't like the person being late. You felt dissed and dismissed. Stick to that. So in this instance, flee, flee, withdrawer, withdrawer, avoider, avoider. You come in late and I don't say anything. And you wait and I don't say anything. The other one, you haven't even closed the door that I'm already on your back. This one, I am cold, ice cold, I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see if you're going to actually say something, but you're waiting to see if I'm actually going to say something. And then I don't talk to you for 3 days, whatever. We don't talk, we go quiet, we cut off, we distance ourselves. And there too, it's the same idea that I am doing this as if I have nothing to lose when I have everything to lose, which is the relationship that matters to me. So to flee people, you know, what happens is that days go by and then suddenly someone says to the other, want to go for lunch? Or makes a little joke. And so it gets smoothed over, but nothing is ever really addressed or resolved. So if you are one of those more inclined, one of those people, you may want to ask yourself, how about I don't just smooth it over, but I say, can we chat about this now? Do we have something that we need to work out? Rather than just letting it simmer, and then it gets cold, and then it kind of settles into a lump, and then you move over it, but the lump never gets removed. Watch your relationships and see which is your prime choreography in the management or in the experience of conflict. What's your stance? Do you go toward it or do you run away from it? One of the very important ways to diffuse conflict is to ask about the hurt that lies underneath. So in fact, instead of saying, what is this fight about? You actually ask, what is it that is hurting you, that is evoked for you, that is living right underneath this fight? There's a particular structure for understanding conflict that was developed by Howard Markman that I find very useful, that I want to share with you. Underlying conflict, there often are 3 hidden agendas, meaning what people are fighting about isn't really what they are fighting about. They may be fighting about who gets to attend this meeting, but that's not the fight. So what are those 3 things? The first one is whose priorities matter most? Who has the power? Who gets to decide? It's not who is at a meeting only, but it evokes in me questions of who is more important than me, questions of relevance. That's what we're fighting about. The second one would be closeness and connection, questions of trust. Who has my back? Can I rely on you? Do you think of me when I'm not here? And the third one is respect and recognition. Do you value me? Do you value my presence, my opinions? Am I valued and legitimate? If you look at your fights and you don't take them literally, you ask yourself, what was it that was really triggered for me? Power and priorities, care and closeness, or respect and recognition. Take a common situation. One person came back late. Now, you can think that you're fighting about the fact that they were late. But if I ask you, what is it that upset you about their lateness? One of you may answer, it's the fact that they always get to do what they want. One of you may answer, it's the fact that they told me that they would be here at 7 and I can't trust them. They don't show up reliably. And one of you may say, it's the fact that I was here with the food prepared and it felt like there is no recognition for my contribution. Same conflict. The fight could look exactly the same. You know, in the end, we are creatures of meaning, and what matters to us most is to feel that other people think of us and that we matter. And in all the 3 situations, we arrive at the same conclusion, but the underlying theme is different. So it looks like we're fighting about your lateness, but we really are hurting about something else. Then it depends how you're going to answer. If you start to justify and counterattack and defend, we lack the empathic connection. There are many different mindsets that we can have when we enter a conflictual situation. One of them is, I'm going to convince you. I'm going to change your mind. I'm going to drill my point of view into you. And here's the truth about this one. The more you're going to try to make them change their mind, the more you are actually contributing to reinforcing the very position that you're trying to undo. That's the paradox. You want to present your point of view as if you have the truth, and you're arguing from a place as if there's only one person who has a brain. You want to invite a conversation that is more empathic. Simply that, why is it easier for you to fight than to listen? It's a very good question. What would happen if you actually heard what hurt me and could respond to it caringly, kindly, rather than fight me over it and pretend that I shouldn't feel this way because I have no right to feel this way, and then we are fully back in conflict land? I wish I could say, when there is conflict, don't ever say X. Don't ever say something you will regret. Don't ever say something the person can never take off their skin afterwards. Don't say things that are contemptuous, that are humiliating, that are shame-inducing. But that is what people who escalate often will do. And they're so used to it that what happens to me as a therapist when I'm sitting with a couple who does this is that I experience the pain of the slings, but they don't even feel it anymore because they've been so conditioned to the roughness of the interaction. I think that I'm going to ask each of you, what is the one thing that you wish you hadn't said? Or what is one conflictual situation that you would love to have an opportunity to do differently? And then say, I wish I could say stop it when somebody goes after me like this. It's not just what you have said, it's also what you haven't said. I wish I would say, I won't let you talk to me this way. That is an important thing also in situations of conflict. It's most important if you can discern where is the place where the corrective would really make a big difference for you. I want you to have a better sense as to what is your stance, your inclination in relation to conflict, and what happens to you in your interaction with others when they are like you and when they are on the other side of you. I also want you to really remember, underneath conflict lie three dominant themes: power, trust, and value. Three essential experiences we all have in relationships. Much of the time, when we get training about communication, we are told how to say things. What I want to focus on in this segment is actually more on your listening skills. How you make yourself available and open and receptive to hear what others have to say. And one of the things that makes effective listening challenging is that we often are half listening and the other half is already thinking about what I'm going to say because I should say something in return. That I'm going to challenge for you. Why is effective listening so important in relationships? Relationships are both. It is the talking, but it is even more so the listening. And it is the listener and the quality of our listening that will actually shape what the speaker will say and how they will say it. We think that the other person just said this because that's what they say, but no. What I'm saying to you is influenced by how I experience your listening to what I'm saying. And your listening to what I'm saying is shaping what I'm going to say next. So listening is anything but passive. It is actually very active and very powerful in shaping the conversation, the communication, and thus the relationship. One of the very important elements around effective listening is to understand the difference between debate and dialogue. If I debate you, I'm arguing. I am trying to make a point. I am more interested with your listening to me than I am interested in listening to you. It is confrontational. And it is meant to win. A dialogue is an exchange. A dialogue, there's no winner. A dialogue invites me listening and then responding on the basis of what I've heard rather than responding from the place of what I already came with before, regardless of what you're going to say anyway. Hence, in a dialogue, I have the feeling that the other person is interested in what I have to say and vice versa. The difference can't be more important. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have times when we are really in a debate, but it's very rare that you win over somebody through a debate. That actually is not very effective. You are more likely to win somebody over, if at all, in a dialogue. In dialogue, we are looking for new options together, and we're looking for the communalities in our arguments. These are two very different, not just styles of communication and argumentation, but these invite two very different experiences of relationships. What's very important to understand about effective listening is how difficult it is to listen when people are saying things that you disagree with. The research of Howard Markman says that we pretty much can tolerate 10 seconds of listening to something that irks us, that we don't agree with, and especially when it's personal and it's critical of us. 10 seconds, that is 3 sentences. And after that, we tune out, either in fight or in flight, because we are attacked. And therefore, I'm either going into debate mode and I attack and I go against what you've just said, or I go into retreat mode and I tune out. And you know that because if you ask people to repeat what the other person has just said, it is astounding to watch how often people are incapable of repeating because they could no longer listen. The brain checked out. One of the very important ways that we can improve listening actually brings us right back to our chapter about self-awareness. I, for example, know that if I talk with someone who tells me implied, I'm right, meaning they are right, and they know, and this is a given, regardless of what I'm about to say, I get agitated. I had a mom who was often very right, and this gets me going. So I know that I'm going to not listen very well when someone is talking to me from the start from the position of they're right and I'm wrong. So then what's the point of having a conversation? My awareness that this is something that I carry inside of me helps me to be able to either say to this person, you know, it's going to be difficult for me to listen to you if you present yourself as all-knowing from the start. Or helps me in my saying to myself, you're going to have to chill a second because it may sound the same, but maybe this person isn't exactly doing it to the intensity that you remember it. The intensity that you remember is in your own body. The first thing I do is I take a deep breath. Then I can ask myself, what in me is being triggered here that I can't listen to what you have to say about me, about the situation, about the world, about politics, about the company, whatever. And then what is very, very good to do is sometimes to just say, can you say this again? Imagine, I can't stand listening to what you have to say, but I'm going to ask you to say it again. Because in a way, it forces me to engage with what you are saying rather than to react to it. That's where the listening takes place. How do we listen and stay engaged in what we are hearing before we are creating our own response? It's actually very effective to do reflective listening at the very moment when listening is the most challenging. And it involves a very simple structure. What I'm hearing you say is this it? Is there more? It makes sense that if I was in this situation, I too may. Very simple prompts that involve empathic reflective listening. And when you do this exercise, you do it 2-3 times, I repeat, and you can see people saying, but when do I get a chance to say my piece? And I say 3 times. 3 times, all you do is repeat. And then you get to do it in reverse, which means you're not just saying your piece, you get to say something that your partner is going to repeat to you time and time again, so that you can feel really heard. And it is amazing how that calms the nervous system. That very structured exercise that is tedious and that is the opposite of what we want to do in the moment is actually the most effective way to calm down and to regenerate this balancing act. To be an effective listener does not mean that you agree with what is being said. It means that you are giving validity to another point of view and that you are willing to comprehend another person's experience that may be very different from yours. If a barrage is coming at you, it's very difficult to listen. And partly because if I hear what you're saying, and especially if I'm being asked to even repeat what you said, as in reflective listening, I have the feeling that I am validating it, that I'm agreeing with it. That is not the case at all. That is not the case at all. Sometimes there is validity in the fact that there are 2 experiences of the same situation. And what makes it very hard for us is when a person that we consider close to us has a completely different experience of the same situation, to the point that we sometimes wonder if it happened in the same room. You know, that's not what happened. I'll tell you what really happened. But on the other end, effective listening also says, I can hear what you're saying. I can hear how you are seeing what I did, even if I don't think that that's what I did. And that doesn't mean I agree with your description. It just means that you too have a brain and that we may have perceived the situation very differently. One of the ways that we help people feel heard and we are able to listen to them without falling in the trap of if I repeat it or if I hear it, I agree with it, is by doing very concrete reflective listening steps. when you say something to me, I may start by saying, what I'm hearing you say. What I'm hearing you say is exactly that. I hear what you said, and that's not the same as what you're saying is. It's very important, the wording. What I am hearing you say is that when I didn't call you back after I said that I would check in with you, you thought that I am dismissive and I am not a caring person and I don't follow through on my commitments. Did I hear that well? Yes, that is what I said. And then, again, you go exactly against, instead of wanting to say, I don't want to hear anymore, you do the reverse. You say, is there more? And you invite more explanation, more whatever the person wants to tell you about that situation. And you repeat it again. What I hear you say is, da-da-da-da-da. And then, did I get it? Did I comprehend it? Did I reflect back to you the intent and the intention of what you're trying to convey to me? Yes. And then, is there more? So to hang yourself on a little scaffold of this kind of pre-written script, even though it's like the last thing you want to do in those moments, it's actually extremely helpful. Try it. I think that a beautiful piece to bring to our practice of listening, because listening is a practice. There's two things that come to mind to me right now. One is the ability to say, let me sit with this. I want to think about what you have to say. I don't think this is a good moment for me to respond. So that's the first one. And the second one is simply stating, this is hard for me to hear. And listening sometimes does require inviting the other person to say it again and differently. To say it differently. You're allowed to say, it is hard for me to hear it this way, but I want to understand what you're trying to say. Can you say this to me differently? The other one is, this is hard for me to hear. I think that if you can track and express your process as it's happening and just state it as is, that too will help with the listening. Because to say it's hard for me to listen is in itself something that will calm you and it grounds you. And it goes outside of the content. I agree, I disagree, simply this is hard for me to hear. Listening doesn't instantly mean responding. I've emphasized in this moment the challenge of listening when what you're hearing is negative stuff coming at you. But there's another experience of listening that I find many people struggle with. You talk to me about painful stuff, or you talk to me about a problem that you're having or a dilemma that you need to solve. And I register it not just as listening, because that feels too passive, but like I have to do something. I have to fix it. I have to solve the problem. I have to make the feeling go away. And how many of you have heard yourself say, I don't want you to fix it, I just want you to hear it. I need the space to feel, emote, think out loud. I don't need you to enter in there and start to shuffle the pieces and put some order into things. I can do this myself. But for many of us, it makes us feel too helpless and too useless. Like, why am I listening if I can't do anything about it? And all I want to say to you people is listening is plenty of doing. So then you're going to ask me, well, what shall I do if I can't fix the problem, if there's nothing I can do? And what is it like to be with someone? I get it. That really sucks. I'm with you. I hear you. Tell me more. How is this for you? Again, join, ask some questions, let it reverberate on you, but don't start organizing it. Don't feel the urge that you have to take this away. The feeling is often legitimate. If a person is pissed, sad, angry, hurt, they probably have a reason to feel so. We don't need to do anything about this. If the feelings exist, they will go through and they will come out on the other side. So when it comes to effective listening, remember, you're having a dialogue, not a debate. Reflective listening helps validate the other person's experience. But keep in mind, validating someone's experience doesn't rob you of your point of view, nor does it mean that you agree. It makes room for you and for the other person. And just listening is always more than just that. Let me invite you in a little exercise about listening on both sides. Think of a situation where you did not feel heard, where you felt that the quality of listening of the person or the people you were talking to was poor. And what happened to you? What did you do? What did you say? What did you not say? And how did they react? And then think about a situation where you wished you had listened better, where you didn't pay attention, or you cut off, or you counter-argued. And what was that like for you afterwards? And what do you think happened with the other person? And especially, what did it do to the relationship? Now, for some of us, me included, that may be this morning or yesterday. It doesn't mean we have to go very far back. You know, I'm no different. There are times when I listen well and times when I listen very poorly. And there are times when I feel really heard and times when I feel like I am not. Go on both sides and then watch what are the different things that you notice in each of these experiences. If you can, and you have the person there with whom it happened, then go to the next level and discuss it with them. Did you guess right what happened to them? Or is their experience even different from what you imagined? And are they able to understand what it's like for you when you don't feel heard or when you didn't listen to them? And then come back to me. At the root of miscommunication is people. I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to send you a message. And by the time my message has arrived to you, it has traveled through the land of expectations, the land of assumptions, the land of interpretations, the land of misunderstandings about the meaning of words, and the land of our respective filters with which we experience the message that has just been sent. And at that moment, you're going to receive and send a message back to me. And the whole trip of this message coming back to me, by the time it reaches me, God knows what kinds of distortions have occurred with it. It's a fascinating thing to watch miscommunication. You know, the difference between intention, delivery, reception, interpretation, and response. All of those, every one of those steps could be affected in the process of miscommunication. There's a question that always comes back around miscommunication. It's who's responsible? The speaker or the receiver? And it's both ends. If you know that you have someone who's highly sensitive to criticism, you're going to speak differently than if you talk to someone who you know tends to take the message at face value, doesn't instantly personalize it, doesn't think that you're making a total condemnation of their entire work. You're not saying the whole thing you did was wrong and you are worthless and how can you be so dumb? But this is what people do with communication. They take sentences and they give them meanings that you cannot predict. And that becomes the source of the miscommunication. Sometimes you have meanings that you are not aware of, that are implied in what you're saying, that you think you're not saying, but they are there. And those we call biases, and those we sometimes call unconscious biases. So sometimes the miscommunication is on the part of the person who delivers, and sometimes the miscommunication is on the side of the person who hears. I'd like to play another clip from the podcast Housework. And this pair has two men who are both business partners in their macaroon bakery, as well as partners in life. One is Dutch, one is Brazilian. What isn't working for them is that they've put themselves into tiny boxes, the creative and the pragmatic, and they can't communicate past these truncated identities. They're increasingly frustrated with how the other reacts in any given situation, and they're at a loss for how to communicate and problem solve together.
You know, there's a lot of love for me for him, and I have a lot of respect for him as a business owner and as my partner. But there's some situations that I find really difficult to deal with whenever it comes to problem solving in the company or make a separation in the relationship and the company. He's really smart. He knows which direction he wants to go to, but he's also a man who is, in my opinion, dealing with problems in a way that is not really my way to deal with problems. He's always wants to solve it immediately. I need to have time. I need an hour or two or even a day to say, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to organize this? And I sometimes have the feeling that he doesn't give me the time. So I feel pushed in a corner, which makes me frustrated. And whenever it goes over and over and over again like that, just sometimes I get so angry that whenever we have a discussion, I become like not myself.
And I'm afraid that this will take over my tranquility, which it's also related to the fact that I've been depressed and I've had situations in the past that could easily get to me, and I wouldn't be able to deal with it. But the first thing is this: okay, something is threatening, something is we might make me go back to a state of not being well, or a state of anxiety around it. Therefore, I will immediately look for a solution. And this is why a lot of the times I'm talking over people, I am not listening. I am fixated on what I have in mind, because it's a survival thing. Throughout my whole life, I've had a lot of situations that I had to just be a survivor.
So what is new for them at this very moment is that each of them is able to experience their own relational self-awareness as to what is happening to them in those moments of communication and miscommunication. One says, when there is a situation that is stressful, I actually need to first go and regroup. And the other one answers and says, I need to act right away, not because I'm smarter, not because I know the answer, but because there is such a sense of anxiety inside of me that I need to act fast. And they are right there with the deep awareness, each of them, as to what drives them. Underneath, this is a beautiful description of survival strategies that drive relationships, communication, conflict, and miscommunication. What you notice also is that neither of them is saying, you, you, you. I ask them each to speak about themselves. Me, me, this is what I feel, this is what's happening to me. There is no blame and no guilt attribution and no accusations going on at this moment. There is each person able to reflect from the place of their own survival strategies, the coping styles that they learned in the course of their life. And now the attunement comes in their ability to respond caringly and empathically to what each one just described about themselves. This is where the communication correction takes place. Communicating is relating. When we relate, we constantly are in a back and forth between ruptures and repairs. When you learn to play an instrument, you often will play a wrong note. You're miscommunicating. Then you learn to listen to it again. Then you learn to repeat it differently. You're attuning your ear. You're internalizing the sound, and you're able to sing it or play it accurately. Miscommunication is part of communication, like missing a tone or a note is part of learning to play music. It's normal. It's natural. There's nothing wrong with us because we miscommunicate. We actually maybe don't even need to call it miscommunication, because that implies that there is the right one and the wrong one. It's that the process of communication is a process of attunement, of learning to play the note and hear the note accurately. In this instance, the note is the other person. So if I don't know you, and I just simply say, it was a really nice project you delivered yesterday, I can't anticipate what your interpretation is going to be. But once you have responded to me, I can get the cue that says, I've actually appreciated your other projects too. This one just stood out for me, even more so. Meaning, your response to me should inform me about how you heard what I said and what I could add to make sure that my intention matches my delivery and your reception. Communication constantly happens at multiple levels at the same time, the explicit and the implicit. It's a very complex system, but it gets to be adjusted all the time. I don't just have the chance to make one statement and you one response. We go back and forth, and it is a process of attunement communication. The shift from miscommunication to good communication is actually a process from misattunement to attunement. When it comes to miscommunication, we can't underestimate the importance of psycholinguistics, the importance of cultural differences, the importance of the interconnection between gender and psycholinguistics. For example, if you have been educated to state your needs and your wants because it is part of your gender and it is part of how your culture sees confidence, you will communicate very differently than if you come from societies where harmony is more at the center, and therefore the focus is not on your stating your thoughts, but on intuiting how other people are feeling about the situation at this moment. And so you're going to communicate with much more indirectness. Every culture can map communication between direct and indirect. Those are major cultural differences that apply directly to communication and how we speak. Same for gender. If you are raised to be in a more subservient role, you have not been told to speak up and to say what you think. So what have you been told is that you wait for the other person to know what you want without having to say it. Women, I think many of us can understand what I'm talking about this one. I always remember this beautiful example from a book by Deborah Tannen, You Just Don't Understand Me, in which there is this wonderful vignette where she says to him while they're driving on the road, "Do you want to stop to get something to drink?" And he says, "No, I'm not thirsty nor hungry. I'm happy to continue driving." And she gets all somber. And he says, "What's up? What's going on? And, why are you upset? I'm not thirsty." And she kind of wants to say, "Well, why don't you ask me if I am thirsty?" And he says, "Well, I figure if you are, you'll tell me." I'm not. You asked me if I was. And she says, "I wasn't asking you just to ask about you. I was asking you so that you would ask about me." And he's like, "That's so twisted. Why don't you just tell me what you want?" And, because she's been told over many, many years and many centuries before her that that's not what she should do. Therefore, she communicates with the question is an invitation for you to ask me the question. And he interprets it as the question is asking me about myself. Well, here you have miscommunication around a very traditional gender construct. So be aware that communication is highly influenced by cultural differences, by gender specificities and messages, by generational elements. All these parts will shape communication and miscommunication. Some of the things that make communication loaded, weighty, grinding. For example, I said something, I say it again. I repeat it. I say it with the same words. I say it with other words. I over-explain. Now, what's the problem in this? It's not just the fact that I'm saying it and saying it and saying it, which for some people may be experienced as kind of overwhelming and intrusive and what you think I'm deaf or I'm dumb or I don't get it. But sometimes it's anxiety. I'm not sure I said it right, or you would have done it if you would have done it already. We repeat it because we're not sure we said it right. We said it well. We will be understood. We will not be misunderstood, as in miscommunication. But most of us say it many more times than is actually necessary. Most of us did fine on the first round. We fear miscommunication so much that we end up burdening our communication. Communication is the expressiveness of a host of other feelings that drive it, that have to do with anticipation, sometimes positive, sometimes negative anticipation of the other person, with anger, with frustration, with questions of self-worth and self-esteem, with questions of care and control and recognition. It's the same ones that are in conflict that you will find in communication and that we certainly find in miscommunication. Instead of repeating it again, ask the other person, "Can I ask you, what did you hear me say?" So that you can get a sense as to what isn't coming across. Where are you being misinterpreted, if you want? What do you need to repeat rather than what you are actually repeating? Because communication takes place at so many levels at the same time. Right now I'm talking to you. Part of me is uttering words. Part of me is uttering sounds with an accent. Part of me is communicating with my hands. Part of me is communicating with my body. Part of you is listening to me from a host of different settings I can't even begin to imagine. All of this is embedded in the communication, and all of it is what is going to help us attribute the particular meanings to what we are communicating to each other. All these levels of communication are absent in the abbreviated written forms that we so often use at this moment. And an emoji won't convey that. Research is quite unanimous at this moment that the proliferation of written forms of communication and short, abbreviated forms of communication has lent itself to massive amounts of miscommunications and misunderstandings. So we know that it's very important, email, text, Slack, you name it, to go and check again. But we also know that people are really reading these messages without context, so we gotta be more careful. I happen to be of a generation that still believes that a phone call will go a long way. Talk to somebody. The voice, because that's part of what you miss in the writing. People have written for a long time before too, but it's the particular kind of writing we do. I am not the only person who has started to write emails where I barely even say dear so-and-so or finish with a thank you. I just write a line. It's like that writing of the line stripped from all the protocols of niceties that we call. Well, niceties were also rituals of respect and recognition. If you take away of all of that, you just go to the function, of the message, the instrumental, goal-oriented nature of the message, well, then you dismiss the person. And then that person is not going to respond to you in the same way because they don't feel regarded in the same way. That's one piece. Then when you go and you call, especially when you start to feel like this is going nowhere, there's like messages back and forth, and the miscommunication, the misunderstanding, the conflict starts to become bigger and bigger. Hear people. A person who says, I didn't mean to do this, or I sincerely apologize, and you hear in their voice, when they say, I won't do this again, it's the voice that convinces you of the authenticity and the sincerity of the message, way more than just the words. Call, talk to the person. You will resolve a lot of conflicts way sooner. One of the questions that people often ask about trust is, how does it get built? How do we develop trust? What do you need to feel trusting? When have you felt trust? What are the experiences that accompany the word trust for you? Are you going to say, the fact that I can rely on you, that you're there for me, that you show up? Look at all these expressions, that you have my back, that I can lean on you. When I think of the word trust, I always think of this game that we played on the beach as kids, where there was a circle of people, and then one person was in the center, and they had to let themselves fall and be picked up by the other person, and close their eyes and let themselves go and know that they would be held up so that they wouldn't hit the ground. You won't let me fall. You have my back, literally. You are supporting and sustaining me. What is it for you? Trust is one of these concepts that suffers from a definitional vagueness. We all know when we feel it, and we all know when we don't. But what is it? Is it a feeling? Is it a condition? Is it an outcome? Is it a state? What is trust? And the research is all over the place. At the end of many, many, many papers, what you hear is the sentence, the research could use more research on how to define trust. Trust is physical, it's an embodied experience. It's emotional, it's mental, and for many people, it's also spiritual. This very important question around trust is the relationship between trust and risk. Some people say that you need to trust someone before you are feeling okay to take risks with that person. But some people will say, and this is how the research divides around trust as well, that it is actually by taking risks that the trust develops. For example, trusting in order to risk. I need to know that you will not abandon me, reject me, laugh at me if I talk to you about something that is deeply personal, if I come out to you, if I tell you about certain medical condition that I have. Do I wait till I trust you more is the important piece, before I reveal those things about myself? Or is it the very act of revealing these things about myself to you and your response to me that will be the actual developing of the trust in the moment? Rachel Botsman, who studied trust, has a beautiful line where she says, trust is a confident engagement with the unknown. If you need to know, you're not trusting. Trust in itself is a leap of faith. So do you need to have trust first to then take risks? Or is it the act of engaging with risk that actually builds the trust? I'm going to put the question forward to you, not to answer it, but to actually reflect, think, and discuss with those people that are close to you about it. In a relationship, there are certain small steps that we take that actually confirm or disconfirm the development of trust. So I call them micro risks. In my experience, I will encourage taking risks to a certain degree depending on the experience of violation of trust that a person has had. If I'm going to say to a person who experienced deep betrayal and trauma around breaches of trust to take risks, I need to be very careful. But interestingly, what I experience as a tiny risk, another person may experience as a very big risk. So the word risk itself is also very relative. You have got to think about the person you're speaking to know what they consider is risk-taking. A micro risk may be that I say something about me that I have not shared with you before. A micro risk may be that I say something about you that I have not shared before. A micro risk for some people may be the challenge of saying no, or the challenge of asking for something, which I typically don't do, or the challenge of saying yes to something that I want and make it very clear, which is something I typically don't do. It's not a specific thing, it's the fact that it's the thing that I don't usually do. And that is the risk. I put that forward. And your response to it, trust is really, it's an experience that is built through mutuality and reciprocity. It's not just that fact that I revealed it to you. It's how you responded to it that says, it's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You can do this. I actually appreciate it. Do it again. That kind of messaging that you can say with words or just convey with your eyes says to the other person, you're on safe territory. The more risks you take, the safer you will feel. The safer you feel, the more risks you will take. One of the most painful experiences in a relationship is the betrayal of trust, the violation of trust. It has such shattering consequences. It breaks the entire worldview of a person. One of the ways you understand what trust was is how people react when trust is broken. I thought I knew you. I thought I could count on you. I thought you were there for me. How dare you be so selfish and put your interests first? And did you not think of me? Did I not exist for you? The intensity of it, the raw grief and rage on the breaking of trust is a testimony to the importance and the power of trust. What are some of the typical situations of breaches of trust? You lied to me. You told me you would be there and you were not. You abandoned me. I thought you would show up for me and you were not. You used the money that we made together and you spent it on yourself. You were supposed to protect me and you were nowhere to be found. You were supposed to prevent danger from hitting me and you were not able to. All these situations are betrayals of trust. And the question is always asked, can you repair trust that is broken? Ruptures exist in relationships all the time. What helps the most is to really ground ourselves in reality. Who am I now? Who is here now? But often when we have experienced violations of trust, the past is right there. And so when we ask, how do we mend broken trust? It's not just what you're doing to me today that's determining how I respond to the aggrievement. It's also how I have experienced trust and violations of trust throughout my whole life that will determine how I react to you now. And sometimes I think it depends a little bit like when you drop a plate and it has a big crack in the middle. And sometimes you can glue it and it will stick together. You will always see the crack, but you can use the plate for a whole lifetime. And sometimes it's in splinters and there is no way to put it back together. And then there is also the Japanese art of kitsuki, where you take broken plates with all the small pieces and you put it back together, but not to restore the old one, but to create a new one. And it becomes a piece of art in and of itself. In my opinion, the first time when you trust, you are unguarded sometimes and you are a little bit more blind about it. The second time when you trust with a little bit more of what we call a secondary naivete. You use the plate, but you're just slightly more careful with that plate because you know that it has a crack in the middle. It is quite remarkable to see how trust, when it breaks, it feels shattered and unable to ever be put back together. But in fact, it is quite malleable for some of us. And life and new experiencing, like grafting new cells on top, slowly allow us to re-experience the trust again. My first question to you is going to be this. On the spectrum between trust and risk, do you see yourself as someone who needs to trust first? Or do you see yourself more as someone who is more quick at taking risks? Take a moment to pause and jot it down for yourself. I don't think there is a right one and a wrong one, but it's very informative to you once you know which you are. If you are a person who finds yourself too often instantly trusting people, you open your house to them, you open your heart to them, you open your wallet to them, you just share everything instantly, and you don't enough check who are you doing this with. Meaning you're taking risks without even realizing how many risks you take. That's a way of saying you're trusting too soon. You're trusting because you have such a need, but you're not really looking at the reality around you. The relationship between risk and trust gets more clear for us if we are really able to ground ourselves in the reality of the here and now. And then, what are some risks that you wished you would take and have been reluctant or avoidant to do so? And what are the trust issues that stand in the way for you? What's your fear? I'm going to ask you to take a risk about the risk, meaning do a small step. Don't try not to be afraid. Go with the fear. Let the fear lead you. It is understandable and normal and common that you have the fear. Don't wait till you're not afraid to do it. You're doing it while you are afraid because it's only in the doing and in the positive experience of it that the fear will diminish. Building trust is going to look a little different for each of us because we all have different histories and experiences that shape our ability to trust as we go through life. For me, the keys to building trust are to define what trust means to you, to ground yourself into a reality of a here and now, and you motivate yourself to take micro risks. Everybody understands a relationship that isn't dead, a relationship that is surviving, but it lacks energy, it lacks intensity, it just is gasping. And everyone understands a relationship that is alive, that is vibrant, that is energetic, that is creative, that is imaginative, that is playful, that is generative. All of that is erotic. And I can invite you to look at the important relationships in your life, personal and professional, and ask yourself, which ones of my relationship are truly erotic? For me, eroticism is a quality of aliveness, of vibrancy, of vitality, a life force. This is much more the mystical sense of the word erotic than any sexual meaning that modernity has attributed to it. Which are the relationships where you feel most alive, where you feel playful, that are generative, meaning that they bring things out of you, they're emergent relationships? And which ones are relationships that actually sap your energy, that you feel you're just basically trying to survive in them? Everyone knows the difference between surviving and thriving, and those two are very essential descriptions of relationships. People ask me, how do you bring erotic energy to my relationships? How do I infuse my relationships with that aliveness, with that vibrancy? You start with an intention. And the intention is, I've been thinking about us. And I realized that it's been a while since we talked more deep, since we just put our phones down and we really focused on each other, since we dreamt together, since we talked not just about the everyday long list of to-dos, since we kind of were inquisitive and curious about each other as people. And you start by saying, I believe that one of the best ways we can reconnect is by talking about our longing and our yearning for something that once was a strong connection. And you just start with that. And you talk from a place of openness and invitation and not from a place of, we never talk anymore. That is a place that kind of says, and that's because of you, or, we never have time for each other. And is that really a we, or is that you don't have time for me, So the real truth about reconnecting is the true intention of reconnecting, and that means you need to do the connecting and not complain about the disconnection. So what kinds of initiatives? Something new, something that takes the relationship outside of its comfort zone. And what specifically is not nearly as interesting, because for every relationship, something that is new and more risky is different. Depends where you've held yourself until now. So you look at your relationship and you ask yourself, What's something that I've been wanting to do and we haven't done? What's something different that we could do together? What's a conversation that we've never had? What's an activity that we've never shared? So it can be talking, doing, it's a broad range, but the idea is, how do I take us a step further? And bold may involve vulnerability, it may involve creativity and playfulness, but it really says we're entering with an active engagement with the unknown. And that means curiosity. And curiosity and anticipation are two elements of the mortar of eroticism. One of the keys, for me, one of the keys to establish closeness is to ask better questions. The difference between a question and a better question is the questions that are not really questions. They are statements with a question mark. When I came to the United States, I got asked that question when I would go into a coffee shop in the morning. How are you this morning? And I thought it was a real question and I was meant to answer until I understood that nobody listened to the answer. It wasn't really a question. It was a greeting. It was a very warm greeting, but it really didn't care about how I'm doing. Now, why are questions so important in relationships? Because they're a way of saying, I want to get to know you. Tell me about you. And I'm open to you. And I don't come here with a set of pre-assumptions about who you are. And I don't pretend to know you. I'm asking you, tell me about you. My own podcast starts with that question, where should we begin? Because it is an opening, an invitation. A good question is an invitation. It is not meant to be rushed and closed. It actually is meant to open up. So tell me about yourself is the idea of a good question, and it involves, what's it like for you when you're here today, when you're working here? How has it been for you to be on this new team? How have you felt that people welcomed you? How are you experiencing your sense of belonging to this group at this moment? It is more of a how, and describe it to me and tell me more. And one of my preferred follow-up questions is, tell me more. Say more, keep going, because once you say to a person, tell me more, you're basically saying, I really want to know. A good question conveys the sincerity of the person who is asking the question. It's not just what is the thing you're asking, it's what is it that you're conveying about the relationship that you're trying to establish with the person that you're asking the question to. Small talk, to me, is an essential part of relationship building. It's too easy to dismiss small talk and just say, it's just superficial chit-chat. But this superficial chit-chat sometimes becomes the lead-on for the deepest relationships. There's 3 easy questions that actually are very kind and neutral when you meet new people. Because there is getting to know new people, and then there is getting to know the people that are right next to you, that are no longer new. But I think if you ask people about where they're from, if you ask people about their families, either the family they're from or their children that they may have, and if you ask people about their work, those are 3 things that most often people will be open to speak about. And you can make connections like that. If you are a manager that would like to establish more of a rapport with one of your direct reports, I would suggest you don't start at first with questions about work. And that means that, I think you find out what people are interested in. If they tell you they're interested in travel, you begin to talk to them about their travels, where they have gone, what places have left a mark on them, what places they would like to go back to, how did they start, how did that interest about travel emerge for them? Did it come spontaneously? Was it passed down through the family? You meet them where they are in their interests, in what are the things that are apparent from their alternative resume. You start from there, and you share as well. You don't just turn it into an interview. You too have interests, places you've gone, people that have really marked you. It's not the topic itself, it's the fact that those are generative conversations. They're not just about information gathering. When people tell you about the music they like, there's an enthusiasm. When people talk about the sports they like, everything is material for coming closer when the manager wants to establish a rapport. And then, as you have established that rapport, then you begin to talk about situations at work, who have been your best teachers? And what makes for a good teacher for you? And because you know that a good teacher can turn the most boring topic into something fascinating, and a bad teacher can take the most fascinating topic into something boring. So to ask people about their teachers from elementary school, from high school, gives you a lot of information as the manager. From there, you then say, we're going to be working together, or we have been working together, and I've given you feedback many times. This is my opportunity to invite you to give me feedback about the feedback I give you. Has it been helpful? Do you feel like it's helped you do things differently, better? Has it given you the opportunity to come to me more often? What do you think is the next thing that you and I should be focusing on? Now you're in a direct conversation. We all communicate on two levels. There's the linear, literal level, and then there is the meta level. You can say the right words, but if you say them with a tone that means something different from what the words are implying, if you say it with a body language that goes like this, then it doesn't matter if you said it this way versus that way. You can make a child say thank you. And everybody knows that they can say it in such a way that they're parroting you, but there is absolutely no motivation, no meaning, no intention in what they're saying. So I focus more on the how than just the what. The form is very important, not just the content. You can say, all right, keep talking. I really, no, just keep going. I'm very interested in what you have to say. I would love for you to say, I'm very interested in what you have to say. But if you say it looking down with your head rolling and your hands basically saying, come on, what have you said? This is going to give much more meaning to your message than I really want to hear what you have to say. But if you're saying it very simply, tell me more, I'm very curious. That's so interesting. What you want to say is something that invites the person into a dialogue that says, I'm right here with you, I'm focused, I'm present, I'm curious. Please come toward me as I'm coming toward you. That's what's happening in good questions. You create possibility. I think that that's a word that also goes with questions. They invite possibility and diversity, and it's a broad range and not just 2 + 2 is 4. When people have dinners with friends, sometimes it's about light and fun, and there is no need to create a deeper conversation. But what's very interesting is when one person is going through something, for example. I saw it recently, and one person had a parent who was severely ill, and someone asked, and it could have been a 2-second thing, he's doing a little bit better kind of thing. But somebody said, what's it like for you to see him deteriorate like that over such a long time? And at first you start to see people go a little bit like this, it's uncomfortable, you're putting him on the spot, but no, you're not putting him on the spot. He's been living this thing alone for quite a long time now. And the fact that you are all his friends here asking him gives him an opportunity to just say, it's amazing to see somebody wither away like this. It's really painful. There are days where I just this and days where something. It was an amazing gift that the person who took the chance to just say, what's it been like for you to go through this? We love you and we don't really know what you're going through. And then somebody else could say, I too went through something similar. I remember a time when, and suddenly it becomes a group conversation, and that breeds connection, belonging, solidarity, communality, sameness. All of that suddenly enters and strengthens the friendship. And then you move on and you raise another glass and life continues. I have a whole list of questions that I love for people to ask and to play with when they go to dinner conversations. Describe a time when you changed your mind. I have done this with 15 people around the table. It's a fascinating question. There's no 2 stories the same. It's not so much the particular question you ask, it's the fact that you need to set it up and have buy-in. You need to really know that the people will join you. So at some point you say, can we all gather for a moment? Because I would love for people to have a conversation all together so that it's not just you with the person that's sitting on your left and on your right. And then you say, I was thinking, what has kept you awake at night? What are the big questions that occupy you at this moment? That's a question. What's the best piece of advice that you ever received? You can use any of these questions and you can come up with your own. My suggestion to you is that what will be so powerful is that you do something that you haven't done before. And that you just say, I want to see how this works. And you just try it. And you say, I'd like to have a unified conversation. I'd like to bring us together around one collective question. So you do have to take some leadership once you do this. But I promise you, everybody will remember the conversation more than the food. You now have the building blocks of relational intelligence and the tools needed to reconfigure your relationships with more creativity and flexibility as you continue on your journey toward more meaningful and satisfying connections. You've just been listening to this class, and I hope that you've stayed with me all the way through the end. And so now you're going to ask yourself, now what? If I draw a line here on the floor, an invisible line, and I ask yourself, how do I feel about my relationships today? When on this side, they feel good, integrated. I feel like I handle them well. It's an important part of my life. They're satisfying, they're meaningful, juicy, etc. And on this side, I feel like my relational life as a whole, with friends, with colleagues, with family, with lovers, is not good. It leaves so much to be desired. You may be anywhere on the continuum. Now I want to ask you, what's one change you would like to make? Small. For those of you who need small risks, do a micro step. For those of you who say it's time for me to finally do a big step, take a big risk. What's one change that you would like to make on the continuum towards creating more meaningful and satisfying relationships? And go do it.